Hello everyone, I am Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. I never believed in the stories they told about Fish Lake National Forest, until what happened to me out there. My name is Michael Williams, I'm 34 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. It was supposed to be the perfect RV trip. Sarah and I had been planning it for months, our first real vacation since the divorce papers were signed. Not a romantic getaway, mind you. We were trying to be mature about it, to show Emma that her parents could still be friends. Our 8-year-old daughter deserved that much at least. The 30-foot Winnebago we'd rented felt enormous as we pulled into the remote campground deep in Utah's Fish Lake National Forest. The aspens were just beginning to turn, their leaves shimmering gold against the dark pines. Emma pressed her face to the window, breath fogging the glass as she pointed excitedly at everything. A hawk circling overhead, a cluster of orange mushrooms growing on a fallen log. The way the late afternoon light made the lake beyond the trees look like molten copper. "This is so cool, Dad," she squealed, already unbuckling her seatbelt before I'd even put the RV in park. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "It really is beautiful, Mike. Good choice." I'd picked this spot specifically because it was isolated. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us and nature. Site 23 sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to lean in toward the small clearing. The nearest neighbor was at least half a mile away through thick forest. Perfect for a family trying to heal. What I didn't know then was that we weren't alone. The first night passed peacefully enough. We roasted marshmallows over the fire pit, Emma told us about her favorite books, and Sarah and I managed to have a conversation that didn't end in argument. When bedtime came, Emma claimed the dinette conversion while Sarah took the master bedroom in the back. I settled onto the couch that folded out in the living area. I was just drifting off when I heard it. A soft whisper coming from outside the RV. At first, I thought it was just wind through the pines, but then I caught what sounded like words. Muffled, distant, but definitely human. "Over here. Come over here." I sat up, listening intently. The whispers continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Through the small window above my makeshift bed, I could see nothing but darkness between the trees. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected. But the time read 2:17 a.m. Sarah's soft breathing came from the back bedroom. Emma was silent in her little nook. Just the wind, I told myself. Had to be. But sleep didn't come easily after that. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Emma bounced around the RV like a pinball, eager to explore. Sarah made coffee on the little propane stove while I studied the trail map I'd picked up at the ranger station. "There's a nice loop trail that goes around the lake," I said. "About 3 miles. Perfect for Emma's legs." "Can we see fish?" Emma asked, already lacing up her hiking boots. "Maybe," Sarah said, ruffling our daughter's hair. "If we're quiet and still." We set out after breakfast, Emma skipping ahead on the well-marked trail while Sarah and I followed at a more leisurely pace. The forest was alive with the sounds of late summer, birds calling, insects buzzing, the distant rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Shafts of sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. "Remember when we used to do this all the time?" Sarah said quietly, watching Emma chase a butterfly. I nodded. "Before life got so complicated." "Mike?" She stopped walking and I turned to face her. "I know this is hard, the whole situation, but I want you to know that I think you're a good father. Emma adores you." Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. "Thanks, I needed to hear that." We were about halfway around the lake when Emma came running back toward us, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom! Dad! There's someone up ahead! A lady!" Sarah and I exchanged glances. We hadn't seen another soul since arriving at the campground. "What kind of lady, sweetheart?" Sarah asked. "She's really pale, and she has long dark hair, and she's wearing a white dress. She's just standing by the water, not moving." I felt an odd chill despite the warm afternoon. Did she say anything to you? Emma shook her head. She didn't even look at me. She's just staring at the lake. Come see. We followed Emma down the trail, but when we reached the spot where she claimed to have seen the woman, there was no one there. Just the gently lapping water and a family of ducks paddling near the shore. That's weird, Emma said, looking around. She was right here. Sarah knelt down to Emma's level. Maybe she went back into the woods. Sometimes hikers like to be alone. But I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The ground where Emma said the woman had been standing was bone dry, despite being right at the water's edge where the earth should have been damp from the lapping waves. We completed the loop without further incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow between the trees seemed to shift and move in my peripheral vision. Every broken twig sounded like a footstep. That evening, we cooked dinner on the outdoor propane grill, burgers and corn on the cob. Emma chattered about everything she'd seen on the hike while Sarah and I tried to maintain normal conversation. But as the sun began to set behind the pines, casting long shadows across our campsite, an oppressive quiet settled over the forest. The birds stopped singing first. Then the insects fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. It's really quiet, Emma observed, looking up from her corn. Sarah glanced around nervously. Maybe there's a storm coming. But the sky was clear, painted in brilliant oranges and purples as the last light faded from the world. We moved inside the RV as darkness fell. Emma curled up with a book while Sarah and I played cards at the small dinette table. The LED lights inside made the windows look like black mirrors, reflecting our activities back at us while hiding whatever might be lurking outside. Around 10 o'clock, Emma started yawning. Sarah helped her get ready for bed, brushing her teeth and getting her settled in the converted dinette. I was cleaning up the dinner dishes when I heard it again. The whispers. This time, they were closer, much closer. She's beautiful. The little one is beautiful. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I moved to the window and cupped my hands around my eyes, trying to see past the reflection. Nothing but darkness. Mike! Sarah peered beside me. What is it? Did you hear that? Hear what? The whispers had stopped. I strained to listen but heard only the normal sounds of night. Distant owl calls, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. Nothing, I said. Just thought I heard something. But Sarah was looking at me with concern. You've been jumpy all day. What's going on? I didn't want to worry her, especially with Emma so close. Just tired, I guess. New place, different sounds. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. We went through our nightly routines. Sarah retreating to the back bedroom, me setting up my bed on the fold-out couch. Emma was already asleep, her breathing deep and even. I lay in the dark, listening. The RV's refrigerator hummed quietly. The propane detector beeped softly every few minutes. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling the RV. They started at the front, near the driver's cab, then moved along the passenger side. Past the kitchen window. Past the dinette where Emma slept. Around to the back. I held my breath, straining to hear. The steps paused directly outside the rear bedroom where Sarah was sleeping. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the footsteps resumed, completing their circuit around our temporary home. 3 times they circled. 3 complete rounds. Then they stopped. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, but the footsteps didn't return. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke to screaming. Emma's screams. I bolted upright, immediately alert. Dawn light was filtering through the windows, casting everything in pale gray. Emma was standing at the dinette table, pointing at the window above her bed. There's someone outside. There's someone right outside. Sarah burst from the back bedroom, her hair wild with sleep. What? What's wrong? I moved to where Emma was pointing and looked out the window. There, not 3 feet away, stood a woman in a white dress. She was exactly as Emma had described her, pale as bone, with long black hair that hung like curtains around her face. She stood perfectly still, staring directly at the RV, directly at Emma. Jesus Christ, I breathed. Sarah pushed past me to look. Who is that? What does she want? The woman's head tilted slightly, as if she'd heard Sarah's question. Her lips moved, but no sound penetrated the glass. She raised one pale hand and pressed it against the window. Fingers splayed wide. Make her go away, Daddy. Emma whimpered, pressing herself against my side. I moved toward the RV's door, but Sarah grabbed my arm. Don't go out there. She's just a person, Sarah. Maybe she needs help. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. There was something fundamentally wrong about the woman. The way she stood so perfectly still. The way her eyes never blinked. The way her pale dress seemed to glow in the dim morning light. I looked out the window again, but the woman was gone. Where did she go? Emma asked, her voice shaky. I moved to the front windows, then the side windows, checking every angle. Nothing. The woman had simply vanished. Maybe she walked back into the woods, Sarah said, but she didn't sound convinced. We spent the morning inside the RV, none of us quite ready to venture outside. Emma stayed close to either Sarah or me, jumping at every small sound. Sarah kept checking the windows, her face pale and drawn. I tried to act normal, making breakfast and suggesting activities, but my hands shook slightly as I worked. Around noon, the sense of being trapped became unbearable. We need to get out of here, I said. Go for a drive, see some sights. Sarah nodded eagerly. Good idea. Emma, want to go see if we can find some deer? Emma perked up slightly at this suggestion. We packed a cooler with drinks and snacks, and I fired up the RV's engine. The familiar rumble of the diesel motor was comforting, a connection to the normal world beyond this strange, quiet forest. We drove the winding mountain roads for hours, stopping at scenic overlooks and short nature trails. Emma gradually returned to her usual cheerful self, collecting interesting rocks and pressed leaves in a small bag Sarah had given her. By late afternoon, the morning's frightening encounter felt like a distant nightmare. But as we wound our way back toward the campground, that oppressive quiet settled over us again. The shadows seemed deeper between the trees. The air felt heavier. Maybe we should pack up and head home, Sarah suggested as we pulled back into our campsite. I was surprised to find myself reluctant to leave. We paid for 3 nights, and Emma's having fun. After this morning, it was probably just some hiker who got confused, saw our RV and thought maybe we had a phone or something. Sarah looked skeptical, but Emma was already unbuckling her seatbelt, eager to show off her rock collection to anyone who would listen. We spent the afternoon outside, the 3 of us playing frisbee in the clearing while keeping carefully within sight of the RV. I grilled hot dogs for an early dinner, and we ate sitting around the picnic table trying to maintain the illusion of a normal family camping trip. But as the sun began to set, that unnatural quiet descended again. The forest held its breath. I don't like this place anymore, Emma said suddenly. She was sitting beside me on the picnic table bench, pressing close against my side. What don't you like about it, sweetheart? It feels like someone's always watching us, and it's too quiet. Where are all the animals? She was right. I hadn't seen so much as a squirrel since we'd arrived. No birds in the trees, no insects buzzing around our food. Even the lake, which should have been teeming with fish and waterfowl, seemed lifeless. Maybe we should head home tomorrow, I conceded. Sarah looked relieved. First thing in the morning? First thing. But we never made it to morning. I was lying on my fold-out bed around midnight when I heard the first whisper. Let us in. Let us in. Multiple voices this time. Soft, pleading, coming from all around the RV. I sat up, listening intently. Sarah's bedroom door was closed, but I could hear her moving around restlessly. Emma seemed to be sleeping peacefully. The whispers grew louder. We just want to see. Let us see the little one. My blood turned to ice. I moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. At first I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted, and I realized the forest was full of pale figures. They stood between the trees like sentinels, dozens of them. Men, women, children, all wearing white, all perfectly still, all staring at our RV. Sarah, I called softly. Her bedroom door opened immediately. She'd been awake, listening. "Do you see them?" I whispered. She moved to the window beside me and gasped. "What do they want?" The whispers continued, a chorus of voices now, overlapping and interweaving. "She's perfect, so young, so pure. Let us have her, just for a little while. She belongs with us now." Emma stirred in her bed, and I realized with growing horror that the voices were getting louder, more insistent. "We need to leave," Sarah whispered urgently. "Right now." I nodded, moving toward the driver's seat. But as I reached for the keys, every window in the RV suddenly filled with pale faces. The figures had moved closer, pressing their faces against the glass like moths drawn to light. Their eyes were black holes in their white faces. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering words I couldn't quite make out. Emma woke up screaming. The sound seemed to excite the figures outside. They pressed closer against the windows, their whispers becoming more urgent, more demanding. "Start the engine," Sarah shouted, gathering Emma into her arms. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The diesel engine turned over once, twice, then roared to life. The figures outside recoiled slightly at the sound, but they didn't disappear. Instead, they began to follow as I put the RV in drive and started moving toward the exit road. They kept pace with us effortlessly, gliding through the trees like ghosts. In the side mirrors, I could see more of them emerging from the forest behind us, a pale procession following in our wake. "Faster, Daddy!" Emma cried. I pressed the accelerator, pushing the heavy RV as fast as I dared on the narrow, winding road. Pine branches scraped against the sides as we took the curves too quickly. In the mirrors, the pale figures fell behind, but I could still see them watching from between the trees. We drove through the night without stopping, not daring to pull over until we reached the interstate and the comforting glow of civilization. Even then, I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see white figures standing by the roadside. We returned the RV that afternoon and drove home in stunned silence. Emma seemed to recover quickly the way children do, already chattering about her rock collection and asking when we could go camping again. But Sarah and I were changed by what we'd experienced. We never talked about it directly, but something had shifted between us. The shared terror had created a bond that transcended our marital problems. Within 6 months, we were seeing a counselor together. A year later, we renewed our vows. But I still wake up sometimes, hearing whispers in the darkness. And whenever Emma talks about wanting to go camping again, I find excuses to suggest indoor activities instead. Because I know, with absolute certainty, that those pale figures are still out there in Fish Lake National Forest. Still waiting, still whispering, still wanting our daughter. 3 years have passed since that weekend, and I've tried countless times to rationalize what we experienced. Mass hallucination brought on by stress, carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty RV heater, sleep deprivation affecting our perception. But then I remember the feeling of being watched, the unnatural silence of the forest, the way those pale figures moved with purpose, with intelligence. And I remember something else, something I've never told Sarah or Emma. As we were driving away that final night, I looked back one last time. In the glow of our taillights, I saw something that made my blood freeze. One of the pale figures was wearing Emma's pink jacket, the jacket she'd been wearing the day before, the jacket we couldn't find when we packed up to leave. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if we really all made it out of those woods, or if something is still back there, wearing my daughter's clothes, whispering her name to the darkness. I tell myself it's just my imagination, post-traumatic stress from a frightening experience. But Emma has started talking in her sleep, and the words she whispers sound like the voices from the forest. Come back to us. We're waiting. Sarah thinks it's just nightmares, childhood anxieties manifesting in her dreams. I want to believe that. I have to believe that, because the alternative is too terrifying to consider. The alternative is that something followed us home. Last week, Emma asked if we could go camping again. Remember that place with the lake, Daddy? With all the pretty trees? I felt my chest tighten. What made you think of that place, sweetheart? She shrugged the way 8-year-olds do. I had a dream about it. There were people there, waiting for us. Nice people in white clothes. My hands started shaking. They said they missed me. They said I should come back and visit. Sarah was in the kitchen, washing dishes. She couldn't hear our conversation over the running water. Emma, I said carefully, what else did these people say? She tilted her head, thinking. They said they have something that belongs to me. Something pink. The blood drained from my face. They said if I come back, they'll give it to me. And then we can all be together forever. I knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in mine. Emma, listen to me very carefully. Those people aren't real. They were just in your dream. She looked at me with her wide, innocent eyes. But Daddy, she said, how do you know I was dreaming? That night, after Emma was asleep, I told Sarah everything. About the whispers I'd been hearing, about Emma's dreams, about the pink jacket I'd seen in those final moments as we fled the forest. Sarah listened in growing horror. We need to take her to someone, she said. A therapist, someone who specializes in childhood trauma. I nodded, agreeing completely. But deep down, I wondered if a therapist could help with something like this. Because as we talked, I could hear it again, faint whispers coming from Emma's room. And they weren't coming from Emma. They were coming from outside her window. Soon, very soon, she's ready now. I moved to the window and looked out into our suburban backyard. The neighborhood was quiet, lit by streetlights and porch lamps. Normal, safe. But there, at the edge of our property line, barely visible in the shadows beneath the oak tree, stood a pale figure in white, watching our house, waiting. As I stared, the figure raised one hand and pressed it against an invisible barrier. Fingers splayed wide, the same gesture the woman in the forest had made against the RV window. Then it smiled. And I realized that some campsites never really let you leave. They just follow you home. We're moving next week. Sarah found a house on the other side of the country, as far from Utah as we can get. She thinks distance will help, that Emma will be safe if we're far enough away. I want to believe that too, but I know better now, because last night, Emma came into our bedroom. Daddy, she whispered, they're here. I looked out the window and saw them, dozens of pale figures standing in our yard, between the houses, filling the street, all staring at our home, all waiting. They say it's time to go back, Emma said. Her voice was strange, distant. They say I've been away long enough. I turned to look at my daughter and my heart stopped. Her eyes were completely black. They say, you can come too, if you want. All of us together, forever and ever. Sarah was stirring beside me, beginning to wake. I had perhaps seconds before she saw Emma's transformed state, before she realized that whatever had been waiting in Fish Lake National Forest had finally claimed our daughter. Emma, I whispered desperately, fight them. You're stronger than they are. She tilted her head, studying me with those terrible black eyes. But Daddy, she said in a voice that was no longer entirely hers, why would I want to fight them? They love me. They want me. They'll never leave me. Behind her, I could see the pale figures pressing against our windows, their faces eager and hungry. And I realized that some horror stories don't have endings. They just have new beginnings. The whispers are getting louder now. They're calling my name. They're calling Sarah's name. And somewhere in the distance, I can hear the sound of wind through pine trees, even though we're hundreds of miles from any forest. Emma is smiling now, and her smile is no longer her own. If you're reading this, don't go to Fish Lake National Forest. Don't camp in the remote sites. Don't listen to the whispers in the darkness. And if you have children, keep them close. Keep them safe. Because the pale figures are always watching. Always waiting, always hungry for something pure and innocent and beautiful, just like my Emma was, just like my Emma used to be, before she became one of them. The whispers are so loud now I can barely think. They're saying it's time to go, time to return to the forest, time to join them. Sarah is waking up. She's going to scream when she sees Emma's eyes, She's going to try to fight, but it's too late for fighting now. It was too late the moment we pulled into that campsite, the moment we heard the first whisper, the moment they saw our daughter and decided she belonged to them. I can see the RV now waiting outside, the same RV we rented 3 years ago. Impossible, but there it is. Emma is taking my hand. Sarah is screaming. The pale figures are coming inside, and somewhere in the distance I can hear the sound of wind through pine trees, calling us home, calling us back to Fish Lake National Forest, where we belong now, where we'll always belong, forever and ever. In the whispers, in the darkness, in the pale, hungry silence between the trees. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Jessica Davis. I had just turned 29 when we arrived at Devil's River in Texas, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The plan had been simple enough, a week-long RV trip through West Texas with my best friend Amanda and her boyfriend Kyle. Amanda had just finished her nursing degree, Kyle had landed a promotion at his engineering firm, and I was between jobs after quitting my soul-crushing marketing position. We deserved a break, we told ourselves. Time to decompress and figure out what came next. The 35-foot Class A motorhome Kyle had borrowed from his uncle was a beast, fully loaded with slide-outs, a queen bed in the back, bunk beds, and enough amenities to make camping feel luxurious. We'd picked up supplies in San Antonio and headed west toward some of the most remote country in Texas. Devil's River State Natural Area wasn't our original destination. We'd planned to camp at Garner State Park, but a last-minute closure due to unusual wildlife activity had forced us to find alternatives. The ranger at the visitor center had suggested Devil's River, though something in his expression gave me pause. "Beautiful country out there," he'd said, not quite meeting our eyes. "Real isolated. Sometimes folks don't see another soul for days." "That's exactly what we want," Kyle had grinned, wrapping his arm around Amanda's shoulders. "Just us and nature." The ranger had nodded slowly. "Just be careful. Stick to the main roads, and if you hear anything strange at night..." He'd paused as if reconsidering his words. "Well, probably just coyotes. They can sound almost human sometimes." Amanda and I had exchanged amused glances. Texas folklore was legendary, and every local had stories about their particular patch of wilderness. We thanked the ranger and headed out, excited for our adventure. The drive to Devil's River took us through increasingly desolate country. Rolling hills covered in scrub brush and limestone outcroppings stretched to the horizon. The few towns we passed through were little more than gas stations and general stores, their populations barely registering in the double digits. "God, this place is in the middle of nowhere," Amanda said, watching the empty landscape roll by. She was sitting in the passenger seat beside Kyle, her long blonde hair whipping in the wind from the open window. "That's the point," Kyle replied. He was one of those outdoorsy types who thought civilization was overrated. All hiking boots and REI gear, convinced that a weekend in nature could cure whatever ailed you. When's the last time any of us were completely disconnected? He had a point. Even I, perpetually glued to my phone, had to admit there was something appealing about digital silence. My last job had been demanding to the point of abuse, with emails at all hours and constant pressure to produce content for clients who never seemed satisfied. A few days without notifications sounded like heaven. We reached the park entrance as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The gatehouse was unmanned, with a simple honor system payment box and a map of available camping sites. Kyle chose a spot called Echo Crossing, located deep in the park along a bend in the Devil's River itself. "Listen to this," he said, reading from the park brochure. "Echo Crossing gets its name from the unique acoustic properties of the limestone canyon walls. Sounds can carry for miles in unexpected directions." "Spooky," Amanda said with a theatrical shiver. The road to our campsite was barely 2 lanes of packed dirt, winding through increasingly rugged terrain. Prickly pear cacti and mesquite trees dotted the landscape, while overhead turkey vultures rode the thermals in lazy circles. As we descended into the river valley, the walls rose around us like ancient fortress battlements, their limestone faces carved into fantastic shapes by millions of years of wind and water. Echo Crossing was everything the brochure had promised. A small clearing beside the river, surrounded by towering canyon walls that created a natural amphitheater. A concrete picnic table and fire ring were the only signs of human presence. The nearest neighbor was miles away. "This is perfect," Amanda breathed, stepping out of the RV to survey our surroundings. I had to agree. The sight was spectacular, with the river gurgling softly just yards away and the canyon walls creating a sense of protected intimacy. As Kyle went through the process of leveling the RV and connecting utilities, Amanda and I explored the immediate area. The water was crystal clear, flowing over rounded limestone boulders that had been polished smooth by countless years of current. Small fish darted between the rocks, and dragonflies skimmed the surface. On the far bank, a great blue heron stood motionless, waiting for an unwary minnow to swim within striking distance. "It's like a postcard," Amanda said, snapping photos with her phone while she still had battery. We'd agreed to conserve power since we'd be dry camping without electrical hookups. That first evening passed peacefully. Kyle grilled steaks on the RV's outdoor kitchen while Amanda and I sat by the river with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. The acoustics were indeed remarkable. Every small sound seemed amplified and clarified. The splash of a jumping fish sounded like a gunshot. Our conversations echoed back to us from the far canyon wall with startling clarity. "Hello," Amanda called out playfully, and her voice bounced back multiple times. "Hello, hello, hello." "Try something else," Kyle suggested, bringing over the steaks. "I love Texas," she shouted. "You love Texas. Texas, Texas," the echo replied. We were still laughing about it when the sun finally disappeared behind the canyon rim, plunging our little valley into premature darkness. Kyle lit the propane lanterns while I started a fire in the ring. Soon, we were sitting around the flames, sharing stories and enjoying the peaceful isolation. It was Amanda who first noticed something odd. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked, setting down her wine glass. Kyle and I stopped talking, listening. At first I heard only the normal sounds of night, the river flowing, insects chirping, the distant call of an owl. Then I heard it too, an echo, but not of anything we'd said. A voice, distant and distorted, seeming to come from deep within the canyon walls themselves. "Help. Someone help." The three of us looked at each other, suddenly alert. "Probably just another camper," Kyle said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It sounded close," Amanda said. "Should we check it out?" I was already reaching for my flashlight. "Maybe someone's in trouble." We walked to the edge of our campsite, shining our lights toward the canyon walls. The beams barely penetrated the darkness, creating shifting pools of illumination that only made the shadows beyond seem deeper and more menacing. "Hello?" Kyle called out. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" His words echoed back from multiple directions, overlapping and distorting until they became an incomprehensible chorus. We waited, but no response came. "Weird," Amanda muttered. We lingered outside for a few more minutes, but heard nothing else unusual. Eventually, we retreated back to the fire, though the mood had shifted. The canyon walls that had seemed protective during daylight now felt oppressive, like the walls of a prison. "I'm sure it was nothing," Kyle said, but he kept glancing toward the darkness beyond our circle of light. We turned in early, with Kyle and Amanda taking the master bedroom in the back of the RV while I settled into the dinette conversion near the front. I'd always been a light sleeper, so I wasn't surprised when small sounds woke me throughout the night. The RV settling on its leveling jacks, the propane refrigerator cycling on and off, the distant call of coyotes somewhere in the hills. But around 3 in the morning, I woke to something different. Whispering. Soft, urgent whispers that seemed to come from just outside the RV. I lay still, listening intently. The voices were too muffled to make out words, but there was definitely more than one person talking. The sound moved around the RV, as if the speakers were walking in slow circles around our camp. I slipped out of bed and moved to the window, careful not to make any noise. The darkness outside was absolute. No moon, no stars visible beyond the canyon rim. I pressed my face to the glass, trying to see who was out there, but the whispers stopped the moment I reached the window. Silence stretched for several minutes. Then, just as I was about to return to bed, I heard it again. My own voice. Help. Someone help. The exact words we'd heard earlier, but in my voice, echoing back from the canyon walls with perfect clarity. But I hadn't said anything. I was standing silently at the window, not making a sound. A chill ran down my spine. I looked toward the back of the RV, where Kyle and Amanda were sleeping. Through the thin walls, I could hear Kyle's soft snoring. Whatever was happening outside, it wasn't them playing a prank. I watched at the window until dawn, but saw nothing more than shadows and heard nothing but the normal sounds of night. When the sun finally crested the canyon rim, flooding our little valley with golden light, the terror of the previous hours seemed almost laughable. Amanda was the first to wake, emerging from the bedroom with her hair tousled and a sleepy smile on her face. "Morning, Jess. Sleep well?" I decided not to mention the whispers. What was I going to say? That I'd heard voices in the night? That something had mimicked my voice back to me? It sounded crazy, even in my own head. "Fine," I lied. "How about you? Like a rock." Kyle, on the other hand, she gestured toward the bedroom where her boyfriend's snoring had reached chainsaw levels. We made coffee on the RV's stove and sat outside at the picnic table, watching the morning light slowly work its way down the canyon walls. The heron was back at its fishing spot, and somewhere upstream, a kingfisher rattled its territorial call. "This place is amazing," Amanda said, cradling her coffee mug. "I can see why people fall in love with the desert." I nodded, though something about the canyon felt different in daylight, less welcoming. The walls seemed to lean in closer, and despite the warming sun, I couldn't shake the chill from the night before. Kyle emerged an hour later, stretching and yawning. "What's the plan for today?" "I thought we might hike upstream," Amanda suggested. "The map shows some pools and waterfalls about 2 miles up the river." It sounded like a good idea. Physical activity would shake off my lingering unease, and the canyon was undeniably beautiful in daylight. We packed day packs with water and snacks, left a note on the RV in case any rangers came by, and set off along the river trail. The hike was everything we'd hoped for. The river carved a serpentine path through the limestone, creating a series of emerald pools connected by small waterfalls. We stopped frequently to take photos and simply enjoy the spectacular scenery. Amanda, whose nursing background included wilderness first aid training, identified various desert plants and their traditional medicinal uses. "This is Turk's cap," she said, pointing to a red flower growing in the shade of a massive boulder. "Native Americans used it to treat kidney problems." "How do you know all this stuff?" Kyle asked, genuinely impressed. "Herbalism class in nursing school. You'd be amazed what people used before modern medicine." We had lunch beside a particularly beautiful pool, watching water striders dance across the surface while small fish investigated our dangling feet. For a while, I forgot all about the strange sounds from the night before. This was what we'd come for. Peace, natural beauty, time away from the pressures of modern life. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to notice something odd. The canyon walls carried sound in strange ways, just as the brochure had mentioned. But it wasn't just simple echoes. Sounds seemed to bounce around in complex patterns, arriving from unexpected directions and at unexpected times. At one point, Kyle called Amanda's name from maybe 50 feet away, but I heard his voice come from directly behind me. Another time, Amanda's laugh echoed back to us nearly a full minute after she'd stopped laughing, as if the sound had taken some circuitous route through hidden chambers in the limestone. "The acoustics here are really weird," I commented as we started the hike back to camp. "It's the limestone," Kyle explained. "A lot of caves and hollow spaces. Sound probably bounces around in there like a pinball machine." That made sense, but it didn't make me feel any better. There was something unnatural about the way voices seemed to persist and transform in this place, taking on lives of their own. We reached the RV as the sun was beginning to set. tired but satisfied with our day's adventure. While Kyle started dinner prep, Amanda and I sat by the river with glasses of wine, comparing photos on our phones. "Look at this one," she said, showing me a picture of the largest waterfall we'd visited. "It's like something out of a fairy tale." I leaned closer to look at her phone screen, and my blood ran cold. There, barely visible in the background of the photo, was a figure standing on the canyon rim high above us. A pale figure in what looked like a white dress. "Amanda," I said carefully, "when did you take this?" "About an hour ago." "Why?" "Look in the background, on the rim." She squinted at the screen, then her eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" Kyle heard the concern in our voices and came over to look. "Probably just another hiker," he said after studying the image. "Lot of trails up on the rim." But I wasn't convinced. The figure in the photo was too far away to make out clearly, but something about its posture struck me as wrong. It stood too still, too perfectly balanced on the edge of a cliff that should have been difficult to access. "We didn't see anyone all day," Amanda pointed out. "Doesn't mean they weren't there," Kyle replied, but he sounded less certain than before. As darkness fell, I found myself watching the canyon rim, looking for any sign of movement. But the walls were too high and the darkness too complete to see anything beyond our small circle of light. We cooked dinner on the outdoor grill again, but the mood was more subdued than the night before. The strange acoustics seemed more pronounced in the darkness, with every sound taking on an ominous quality. The splash of a fish jumping became the slap of something large hitting the water. The call of a night bird transformed into something almost human. "I keep feeling like we're being watched," Amanda admitted as we sat around the fire after dinner. I was relieved to hear her voice my own concerns. "Me too, ever since we saw that figure in your photo." Kyle poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-filled sky. "Probably just paranoia. City folks aren't used to this kind of isolation." But I noticed he kept glancing toward the canyon walls as he spoke. We went to bed earlier than the previous night, all of us claiming exhaustion from the hike. I lay in my converted dinette bed, listening to the sounds of Kyle and Amanda settling in for the night. Their whispered conversation carried clearly through the thin RV walls, but I couldn't make out the words. I was just beginning to drift off when the whispering started again. This time it was louder, more distinct. Multiple voices coming from different directions around the RV. But what made my blood freeze was the realization that I could understand some of the words. "Beautiful, so beautiful. Young ones, fresh, take them tonight." I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. These weren't random night sounds or acoustic tricks. Someone was outside our RV, talking about us. The whispers moved around the vehicle in a slow circuit, just as they had the night before. But now I could make out fragments of conversation, planning something I didn't want to understand. Sleeping, all sleeping. "Easy, so easy. Join us. They'll join us." I slipped out of bed and moved to the front window, praying I wouldn't see anything but knowing I had to look. The darkness outside was impenetrable, but I could hear footsteps now. Soft, deliberate steps moving around the RV. Then I saw a pale hand press against the window inches from my face. I jerked backward, biting back a scream. The hand was pressed flat against the glass, fingers splayed wide, as if someone was trying to feel their way inside. The skin was bone white and looked somehow wrong, too smooth, too uniform, like porcelain. I wanted to wake Kyle and Amanda, but I was frozen with terror. The hand remained pressed against the window for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then it slowly slid down the glass and disappeared. The whispers continued for most of the night, circling the RV in an endless procession. Sometimes they spoke words I could understand, fragments of plans and desires that made my skin crawl. Other times they spoke in what sounded like another language entirely. Flowing, musical syllables that were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Near dawn, the voices began to fade. But before they disappeared entirely, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. My own voice coming from outside the RV. "Help us," it said clearly. "Please help us. We're trapped." But I was inside, silent and terrified, my mouth firmly closed. I didn't sleep for the remainder of the night. The next morning, I was exhausted and jumpy. Amanda noticed immediately. "You look terrible," she said with concern. "Are you feeling okay?" I wanted to tell her everything, about the whispers, the hand against the window, the voice that sounded like mine. But in the bright morning sunlight, with birds singing and the river flowing peacefully past our camp, it all seemed impossible. "Just couldn't sleep," I said. "Too excited about being in nature, I guess." Kyle emerged from the bedroom looking well-rested and cheerful. "Another gorgeous day in paradise," he announced, stretching in the morning sun. But as we went through our morning routine, I began to notice things that hadn't been there the day before. Handprints on the windows, dozens of them, as if multiple people had been pressing against the glass. Footprints in the dirt around the RV, forming a clear circle around our camp. "Guys," I said carefully, "look at this." I showed them the prints, clearly visible in the soft earth. Kyle knelt down to examine them more closely. "Weird," he said. "These look old, like they've been here a while." But I knew they hadn't been there when we'd arrived. The ground around our camp had been pristine. Amanda was studying the handprints on the windows. "These are strange too. Look at the size. Some are tiny, like children's hands. Others are huge." A chill ran through me. During the night, I'd heard the voices of different ages and genders whispering around our RV. Could these prints be evidence of who, or what, had been out there? "Maybe we should pack up and head to a different campground," I suggested. Kyle looked at me like I was crazy. "Because of some handprints? Come on, Jess. It's probably just other campers who stop by to look at our rig. RVers do that all the time." "In the middle of the night?" I asked. "Maybe they were here before us and the prints are old." But Amanda was looking thoughtful. "Actually, I didn't sleep that well either. I kept hearing voices outside." Kyle's expression shifted slightly. "What kind of voices?" "Whispers, like people talking quietly. I figured it was just the acoustics playing tricks, but what?" She hesitated. I could have sworn I heard my own voice at one point, calling for help. The three of us looked at each other in growing unease. If both Amanda and I had experienced the same phenomenon, it wasn't just imagination or paranoia. "Okay," Kyle said slowly. "That's definitely weird. But there's got to be a rational explanation." "Like what?" I asked. "I don't know. Some kind of natural acoustic phenomenon. Sound recording and playback in the limestone. It's happened before in other cave systems." It was a stretch, but I wanted to believe him. The alternative, that something was actively mimicking our voices, was too disturbing to consider. We spent the day exploring more of the river system, but the sense of unease never left me. Every shadow seemed to hide a watching presence. Every sound made me jump. Even Amanda seemed on edge, constantly looking over her shoulder and starting at sudden noises. Kyle maintained his rational skepticism, but I noticed he suggested we stick together rather than splitting up to explore different areas. As evening approached, I dreaded the coming darkness. The thought of another night of whispers and watching presences filled me with anxiety. "Maybe we should drive into town for dinner," I suggested as we headed back to camp. "Get a change of scenery. The nearest town is 40 miles away," Kyle pointed out. "By the time we get there and back, it'll be past midnight. So we stay in town for the night, find a motel." Amanda looked at me with concern. "Jess, what's really going on? You've been jumpy all day." I took a deep breath and told them everything. The whispers, the hand against the window, the voice that had sounded exactly like mine. When I finished, they were both staring at me with expressions I couldn't read. "That's," Amanda began, then stopped. "Terrifying," Kyle finished. "If it's true, you think I'm making it up. I think you're stressed," he said gently. "This whole job transition thing has you wound pretty tight. Sometimes stress can manifest in strange ways." I wanted to argue, but doubt began to creep in. Was it possible I'd imagined the whole thing? Stress could cause hallucinations, especially combined with unfamiliar surroundings and isolation. "Look," Amanda said, "why don't we compromise? We'll stay tonight, but we'll all sleep in the main living area. If anything weird happens, we'll all hear it. It seemed like a reasonable plan. That evening, we rearranged the RV's furniture to create sleeping spaces for all three of us in the main cabin. Kyle took the fold-out couch, Amanda claimed the dinette conversion, and I made a bed on the floor with extra cushions. We stayed up later than usual, playing cards and talking, none of us eager to turn off the lights. But eventually, exhaustion won out, and we settled in for the night. I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of whispers. But this time, Kyle and Amanda were awake too. "Do you hear that?" Amanda whispered. "Yeah," Kyle replied, his voice tight with tension. The whispers were all around us, coming from multiple directions. But now, in the company of my friends, I could hear them more clearly than ever before. "Come out. Come out and play. Lonely. So lonely out here. Join us. Stay with us forever." The voices were pleading, seductive, almost hypnotic. Part of me wanted to respond, to open the door and see who was calling to us with such longing. "Don't listen," Amanda said, as if reading my thoughts. "Something's not right about this." But Kyle was already moving toward the door. "Kyle, no," I hissed. "Someone might need help," he said, but his voice sounded strange, distant. "Kyle, look at me," Amanda commanded, using her nurse voice. "Look at me right now." He turned, and I gasped. His eyes were unfocused, as if he was sleepwalking. The whispers seemed to be affecting him more strongly than Amanda and me. "Snap out of it," Amanda said, grabbing his shoulders. He blinked several times, then shook his head as if clearing fog. "What? What was I doing?" "You were about to go outside." "Why would I?" He looked confused, frightened. I felt like I had to, like someone was calling me. The whispers continued, growing more insistent, but now I could hear something else underneath them. A low, rhythmic chanting in that same musical language I'd heard the night before. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Right now." "It's 3 a.m, Kyle protested, though he seemed to be fighting against some internal compulsion. "I don't care. Start the engine." The chanting grew louder, and the RV began to rock slightly, as if people were pushing against it from outside. "Jesus," Amanda breathed. "How many of them are there?" Kyle moved toward the driver's seat, but the whispers seemed to follow him, becoming more urgent, more demanding. "Don't leave. Stay with us. Stay forever. We need you so much. Part of us. Become part of us." I could see Kyle wavering again, his hand hesitating over the ignition. "Kyle," I shouted, "start the damn engine." The harshness of my voice seemed to break whatever spell was affecting him. He turned the key, and the diesel engine roared to life. The effect was immediate. The whispers stopped as if cut off by a switch. The rocking motion ceased. In the sudden silence, we could hear only the rumble of the engine and our own rapid breathing. "Drive," Amanda said. "Just drive." Kyle put the RV in gear and we lurched forward, tires spinning in the soft earth. I looked out the rear window as we pulled away from our campsite, and what I saw there will haunt me for the rest of my life. The canyon walls were lined with pale figures, dozens of them, standing motionless along the rim. In the glow of our taillights, they looked like white candles against the dark stone. As we drove away, they raised their hands in unison, as if waving goodbye, or beckoning us to return. We drove through the night without stopping, none of us speaking until we reached the interstate and the comforting glow of civilization. Even then, we couldn't bring ourselves to talk about what had happened. It was only later, when we stopped for breakfast in San Antonio, that we discovered something that made my blood run cold. Amanda was uploading photos from our trip to social media when she made a strangled sound. "Guys," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Look at this." She showed us her phone. It was a photo she'd taken of our campsite on the first day. A wide shot showing the RV, the river, and the surrounding canyon walls. But in the background, barely visible among the rocks and shadows, were pale figures. Dozens of them standing perfectly still, watching our camp. They'd been there from the very beginning, waiting, watching, planning. "How did we not see them?" Kyle asked, his face pale. "Maybe we weren't supposed to," Amanda replied. "Maybe they only show up in photos." I studied the image more closely and noticed something that made me feel sick. One of the figures, standing at the front of the group, was wearing familiar clothes. My clothes. The same outfit I'd worn on our first day. That's impossible, I breathed. But as we stared at the photo, more details became clear. There was Amanda, standing beside the figure wearing my clothes, and Kyle, positioned slightly behind them both. Perfect duplicates of us, frozen in the limestone shadows. "We need to delete this," Amanda said, her finger hovering over the trash icon. "Wait," I said. "What if this is evidence? What if other people need to know about this place?" "Evidence of what?" Kyle asked. "That some weird photo glitch made it look like we were in two places at once." He was right. Who would believe us? The rational explanation was that it was just a trick of light and shadow, pareidolia making us see human shapes where none existed. But I knew better. I knew we'd encountered something in Devil's River that defied rational explanation. Something that collected voices and images and shapes, storing them in the limestone caves like a vast natural recording device. Something that was still out there, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting campers. We never talked about Devil's River again after that day. Amanda deleted the photos, and we all tried to move on with our lives. Kyle got married the following year, not to Amanda, who broke up with him a month after our trip. She said she couldn't look at him without hearing those whispers, without remembering how easily he'd been influenced by whatever was calling from the darkness. I found a new job, moved to a different city, tried to forget. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers in the darkness, and sometimes I catch myself at the window, looking out into shadows that seem too deep, too watching. Because I know the truth now. I know that some places collect more than just echoes. They collect souls. And somewhere in the limestone canyons of Devil's River, pale figures in familiar clothes are still standing vigil, waiting for the next travelers to join their eternal gathering. Still whispering, still calling, still hungry for company in their endless, watching silence. Last month, I received a message on social media from a stranger, someone named David, who'd found my name in a guest registry at a Texas state park. He wanted to ask me about Devil's River, about Echo Crossing specifically. His family had camped there the previous weekend. His daughter was missing. The search and rescue teams had found no trace of her, he said. It was as if she'd simply vanished into the canyon walls themselves. But the strangest thing, he told me, was what they'd found at the campsite. Footprints in a circle around where their RV had been parked, and handprints on all the windows, including small ones that matched his missing daughter's hands exactly. I stared at his message for a long time before typing my response. "Don't go back there," I wrote. "Whatever you do, don't go back." But I know he will, because that's what the whispers do. They call you back. They make you want to return, to solve the mystery, to find what you've lost. And once you're there, once you hear their voices in the darkness and see their pale forms among the stones, you become part of the collection, part of the eternal gathering in Echo Crossing, where voices live forever in the limestone walls, and the echoes never fade. Never stop calling. Never stop whispering your name in the darkness, promising you'll never be alone again, if you'll just come back. Just one more time. Just stay forever in the beautiful, terrible silence of Devil's River, where the echoes of the lost will welcome you home. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from the Adirondacks. I'm Robert Johnson, and I was 31 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. My older brother David had been planning this trip for months. He'd finally convinced our aging father to join us for what he called one last adventure, before Dad got too old for camping. At 67, Frank Johnson was still spry enough for hiking, but his emphysema was getting worse, and we all knew these family outings were numbered. Just the 3 Johnson men, David had said with that grin of his, roughing it in the wilderness like our grandfather used to do. The 28-foot Jayco we'd rented was hardly roughing it, but Dad seemed excited about the prospect of showing us some of the places he'd camped as a young man in upstate New York. He'd grown up in the shadow of the Adirondack Mountains, and his stories of fishing pristine lakes and hiking untouched trails had been the backdrop of our childhood. "There's this spot I used to go to," Dad had told us as we planned the route. Lake Solitude, they called it. So remote you'd never see another soul for days. Perfect for what we want. Lake Solitude wasn't on any of the modern camping apps or reservation systems. According to Dad, it was an old logging camp from the 1940s that had been converted to a primitive campground in the 60s, then largely forgotten as more accessible parks drew the crowds. The state still maintained basic facilities: pit toilets, fire rings, a boat launch, but you had to know where to look to find it. "Are you sure it's still open?" David had asked, studying the outdated Forest Service map Dad had pulled from his attic. "It was never officially closed," Dad replied. "Just overlooked." The drive north from Syracuse took us through increasingly dense forest. Towering white pines and sugar maples created a green tunnel over the narrow highway, broken only by occasional glimpses of crystal-clear lakes and distant mountain peaks. The further we got from civilization, the more animated Dad became, pointing out landmarks from his youth and telling stories about hunting trips with his own father. "Turn here," he said suddenly, indicating a barely visible dirt road that branched off the main highway. There was no sign, no indication that it led anywhere important. "You sure about this, Dad?" I asked from the driver's seat. The RV was handling well enough on the paved roads, but the dirt track looked rough. "Trust me," he said. "I could find this place blindfolded." The road wound through dense forest for nearly 10 miles, climbing steadily into the mountains. Twice we had to stop to move fallen branches that blocked our path, and once I thought we might have to turn back when the track became so narrow that pine boughs scraped against both sides of the RV. But then the trees opened up, and we found ourselves at the shore of a lake so pristine it looked like something from a nature documentary. Lake Solitude was perhaps a mile across, surrounded by unbroken forest that stretched to the horizon. The water was so clear I could see the bottom 20 feet from shore, and not a single building or power line marred the view. "Jesus, Dad," David breathed, stepping out of the RV to survey the scene. "This is incredible." The campground consisted of a small clearing beside the lake with 3 fire rings and a weathered picnic table. A primitive boat launch extended into the water, and a path led into the woods toward what Dad said were the pit toilets. No electrical hookups, no water spigots, no other campers. "We'll be completely off the grid here," Dad said with satisfaction, "just like the old days." As we set up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest pressed close around our small clearing, a wall of green shadows that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me glance up, expecting to see deer or curious hikers, but we saw nothing, no wildlife at all, which struck me as odd for such a remote location. "Where are all the animals?" I asked as we sat around the fire that first evening. Dad looked up from his fishing rod, which he'd been rigging for the next morning. "What do you mean?" "We've been here all afternoon and I haven't seen so much as a squirrel. No birds, no deer, nothing." David shrugged. "Maybe we scared them off with the RV. They'll come back once they get used to us." But Dad was frowning, looking around the darkening forest with an expression I couldn't read. "That is strange," he admitted. "This lake used to be teeming with life. Loons, eagles, all kinds of waterfowl. When was the last time you were here?" David asked. "Oh, must be 20 years at least. Maybe 25. Dad's voice had taken on a distant quality. "Come to think of it, that last trip was odd." "Odd how?" Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "We caught fish, but they all had strange markings on them. Dark spots under the skin, like bruises, and the water had a funny taste, metallic-like." "Pollution," I suggested. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just remembering it wrong. Memory plays tricks when you get to be my age." We turned in early, with Dad taking the master bedroom in the back of the RV while David and I shared the convertible dinette and couch in the main cabin. I'd always been a light sleeper, so I wasn't surprised when small sounds woke me throughout the night. But these weren't the normal sounds of camping. Around midnight, I heard what sounded like scratching against the outside of the RV. Not the random scraping of wind-blown branches, but rhythmic, deliberate scratches, as if something was trying to claw its way inside. I lay still, listening. The scratching moved from the front of the RV toward the back, following the roofline. Then it stopped directly overhead. For several minutes, there was only silence. Then I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A wet, sliding noise like something large and moist dragging itself across the roof. I wanted to wake David, but I was afraid to make any noise. Whatever was up there might be attracted to sound. So I lay motionless, barely breathing, as the sliding continued for what felt like hours. Near dawn, the sounds finally stopped. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, David was shaking me awake. "Rob, you need to see this." I followed him outside, blinking in the bright morning sunlight. Dad was already up, standing by the picnic table with a cup of coffee and a troubled expression. "Look at the roof," David said. I tilted my head back and gasped. The entire roof of the RV was covered in a thick, translucent slime that caught the morning light like clear gelatin. It coated everything. The air conditioning unit, the TV antenna, the emergency hatch. "What the hell is that?" I asked. "We were hoping you might know," Dad said. "David found it when he went out to start the generator." I walked around the RV, studying the substance. It covered only the roof, dripping down the sides in long, viscous strands. It had no odor that I could detect, but something about it made my skin crawl. "Could be tree sap," David suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "From what tree?" I asked, looking up at the pines towering over our campsite. "And how would sap get distributed so evenly across the entire roof?" Dad was examining one of the dripping strands more closely. "In all my years camping, I've never seen anything like this." "Should we pack up and leave?" David asked. I could see Dad wrestling with the suggestion. This had been his trip, his chance to share childhood memories with his sons. The idea of cutting it short clearly pained him. "Let's see if we can wash it off," he said finally. "If it doesn't come clean, we'll head home." We spent the morning trying to remove the slime with water from the lake and dish soap from the RV's kitchen. Most of it came off easily enough, but it left behind a faint residue that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. "Good enough," Dad declared, though I could see he was troubled. We decided to stay another night, but the mood had shifted. The pristine wilderness that had seemed so peaceful the day before now felt oppressive, threatening. Even Dad seemed on edge, constantly scanning the tree line as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. That afternoon, we took Dad's small fishing boat out onto the lake. The water was so clear we could see all the way to the bottom in most places. But what we saw there made me wish we'd stayed on shore. The lake bed was covered in what looked like bones, thousands of them scattered across the bottom like a white carpet. Most were clearly from fish, but others were larger. The long bones of deer legs, the curved ribs of what might have been bears. "Jesus," David whispered, peering over the side of the boat. "What happened here?" Dad was unusually quiet, his fishing rod forgotten in his hands. "I don't remember this," he said softly. "The bottom used to be sand and small rocks. We tried fishing despite the unsettling discovery, but caught nothing. The fish finder showed no signs of life in the water, no schools of fish, no individual returns, nothing but the bone-covered bottom stretching into the depths. As we headed back to shore, I noticed something that made my stomach clench with unease. The bones weren't randomly scattered. They formed patterns, spirals and geometric shapes that looked almost deliberate, like some kind of underwater mandala made from death. "Dad," I said carefully, "are you sure you want to stay another night?" He was staring at the bone patterns beneath us, his face pale. "You know," he said slowly, "I'm starting to remember more about that last trip. Things I'd forgotten." "What kind of things? We found bones then, too, but not like this. These are arranged." David and I exchanged glances. "Arranged by what?" Dad shook his head. "I don't know, but I remember my father being scared. Really scared. He made us pack up and leave in the middle of the night." "Why didn't you tell us this before?" David asked. "Because I wasn't sure it was real. I was young, maybe 10 or 11, Sometimes childhood memories get mixed up with nightmares. But as we pulled the boat up onto the shore, I was becoming convinced that whatever Dad remembered was all too real. That evening, we built a fire and tried to maintain the illusion of a normal camping trip. Dad told stories about his grandfather, a logger who'd worked these mountains in the early 1900s. But his tales kept returning to strange incidents. Crews who'd disappeared without a trace, camps that had been found empty with meals still warm on the table, reports of something large moving through the forest at night. Grandfather called it the hunger, Dad said, staring into the flames. Said it was older than the trees, older than the mountains themselves, something that had always been here, waiting in the deep places. "Come on, Dad," David said with forced lightness. "You're starting to sound like one of those campfire ghost stories." But Dad's expression was deadly serious. "Some stories are warnings, son, not entertainment." As darkness fell, the oppressive silence of the forest became even more pronounced. No nightbirds called, no insects chirped. Even the water lapping against the shore seemed muted. It was as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. Around 10 o'clock, we retreated to the RV. Dad went straight to bed, claiming exhaustion, but I could see he was scared. David and I stayed up playing cards, neither of us wanting to be alone with our thoughts. "This place is really getting to me," David admitted as he dealt another hand. "I keep feeling like something's watching us." I nodded. "Same here. And did you notice Dad's been looking up at the trees all day? What do you think he's looking for?" "I don't know, but I don't think I want to find out." We played cards until nearly midnight, then finally settled into our respective beds. I lay in the converted dinette, listening to the unnatural silence beyond the RV's thin walls. That's when I heard Dad talking in his sleep. At first, it was just mumbled words, the kind of indistinct speech that often accompanies dreams. But gradually, his voice became clearer, more urgent. "No," he was saying. "Not again. Please, not again." I sat up, wondering if I should wake him. Night terrors weren't uncommon in elderly people, especially when they were stressed or in unfamiliar surroundings. But then, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Another voice answering him. A voice that seemed to come from outside the RV, pressing close against the thin walls. "Yes," it whispered, the sound like wind through dry leaves. Again and again and again. Dad's voice became more agitated. "We left. We never came back. Please, just let us go." "But you did come back," the outside voice replied. "You brought them back. Fresh meat. Young meat." I wanted to wake David, to get him to hear this conversation that couldn't possibly be happening. But I was paralyzed with terror, unable to move or speak. "Take me instead," Dad pleaded. "Leave the boys alone." The thing outside laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Why take one when we can have all? You know what we are. You know what we need." "The bones in the lake," Dad whispered. "All those bones. Decades of feeding. Decades of visitors who stayed too long, wandered too far from their fires. But we've been so hungry lately. So very hungry." I could hear Dad weeping now, quiet sobs of despair and terror. "How long?" he asked. "Until dawn," the voice replied. "Then we feed." The conversation stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of Dad's muffled crying and my own thundering heartbeat. I lay frozen in my bed, trying to process what I'd heard. Had Dad been having a nightmare? Was I dreaming myself? But the rational part of my mind knew better. I'd been wide awake, fully alert. Whatever had been speaking to Dad through the RV's walls was real, and it was planning to kill us before sunrise. I forced myself to move, slipping quietly out of bed and making my way to Dad's room. I found him sitting on the edge of his bed, his face wet with tears. "Dad," I whispered urgently, "we need to leave. Right now." He looked up at me with haunted eyes. "You heard." "I heard enough." "What is that thing?" "Things," he corrected. "Plural. And I don't know what they are. My grandfather had theories, but..." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter. We need to wake David and get out of here." But as I turned toward the main cabin, I realized David wasn't in his bed. The fold-out couch was empty, his covers thrown back as if he'd gotten up suddenly. "David?" I called softly. No answer. I checked the bathroom, the kitchen area, everywhere he could be hiding. But David was gone. "They have him," Dad said quietly. "They took him while we were talking." Panic surged through me. "We have to find him." "No." Dad grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "That's what they want. They'll use him as bait to draw us into the forest. Once we leave the RV, we can't just abandon him. If we go out there, they'll take us all. At least this way, one of us might survive." I stared at my father in disbelief. "You want me to leave my brother to die?" Dad's face crumpled. "I want you to live. David is probably already—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but I couldn't accept that. David was my brother, my responsibility. Whatever was out there in the darkness, I had to try to save him. I moved toward the RV's door, but Dad blocked my path. "Please," he begged. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. I've seen what they do to people. The bones in the lake, those are just what's left after feeding." "Then tell me what they are." Dad looked older than his 67 years, aged by terror and terrible memories. "My grandfather called them the hollow ones. Said they were what happened when hunger became so intense it took on a life of its own. They're not really alive, not in any way we'd understand. They're just need. Endless, consuming need." "That's impossible, is it? You've seen the evidence, the bones, the slime, the way all the animals avoid this place. They know what's here." As if summoned by our conversation, David's voice called out from the darkness beyond the RV. "Rob! Dad! Help me!" My heart leaped at the sound. He was alive, at least for now. "I'm coming," I shouted, reaching for the door handle, but Dad pulled me back. "Listen to his voice," he whispered urgently. "Really listen." I paused, straining to hear. David called out again, pleading for help, but something was wrong with the sound. It was his voice, but it echoed strangely, as if it was coming from multiple directions at once. "They're using him," Dad said, mimicking his voice to lure us out. "The real David is probably—" He didn't need to finish. I understood. But then I heard something that changed everything. "Rob," David's voice called, closer now. "It's okay. I found the way out. There's a trail that leads back to the main road." This time, the voice was different. Clearer, more natural. And it was coming from a specific direction. The hiking trail that led away from the lake. "That's really him," I said. Dad shook his head. "It's a trick. They can mimic perfectly once they've fed. But I couldn't stand the uncertainty. I had to know." Moving to the window, I peered out into the darkness. The forest was a wall of black beyond our small circle of light from the RV's exterior fixtures. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then David stepped into the light. He looked normal. Same clothes, same posture, same face. But something was wrong with his eyes. They reflected the light like an animal's, with an inner glow that didn't belong in a human face. "Rob," he called, smiling widely. "Come on out. I found something amazing." Behind him, barely visible in the darkness, other shapes moved between the trees. Tall, impossibly thin figures that seemed to flow rather than walk. "It's not him," I breathed. Dad appeared beside me at the window. When he saw the thing wearing David's face, he made a sound like a wounded animal. "They've taken his shape," he whispered, fed on him and absorbed his appearance. The David thing continued to smile and call out to us, but now I could see how wrong it was. Its movements were too fluid, too graceful. Its smile was too wide, revealing teeth that seemed somehow too sharp. And its eyes. Its eyes were completely black. "What do we do?" I asked. Dad was already moving toward the driver's seat. "We run. It's all we can do now." I wanted to argue, to insist we couldn't leave David behind. But I knew with horrible certainty that David was already gone. What stood outside was just a hollow shell wearing his appearance. Dad turned the key, and the diesel engine roared to life. The sound seemed to agitate the creatures outside. The David thing's smile faltered, and it began moving toward the RV with unnatural speed. "Go!" I shouted. Dad threw the RV into drive, and we lurched forward, tires spinning in the soft earth. Through the rear window, I could see the David thing and its companions pursuing us, their forms flowing through the darkness like liquid shadow. But they couldn't match the speed of the RV on the rough trail. Within minutes, they had fallen behind, lost in the forest darkness. We drove through the night without stopping, not speaking, both of us lost in our own private horror. It wasn't until we reached the interstate and saw the welcoming glow of civilization that either of us broke the silence. "We have to report this," I said. "David is missing. The police need to know." Dad was quiet for a long moment. "What are we going to tell them? That monsters ate our family member and replaced him with a shape-shifting duplicate? We'll think of something. An accident, maybe. Say he fell in the lake. They'll want to search, send divers down to recover the body." I thought about the bone-covered lake bottom and shuddered. "Then we tell them he wandered off and got lost. They'll search the forest, find nothing, and eventually give up." Dad nodded slowly. "It's not much of a story, but it's better than the truth." We filed the missing person report 2 days later, after we'd returned the RV and had time to get our story straight. David had gone for a late-night walk and never returned, we told the state police. We'd searched for hours before driving out to get help. The search lasted a week. Teams of volunteers combed the forest around Lake Solitude but found no trace of my brother. Eventually, the official search was called off, though his case remained open. I never told the police about the David thing we'd seen that last night. How could I? They'd have had me committed. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they found him after all. If he's still out there in the forest, wearing my brother's face, calling out to passing hikers with David's voice, calling them deeper into the woods, closer to the lake, closer to the hollow ones and their endless, terrible hunger. That was 15 years ago. Dad passed away 5 years later, taking most of his secrets with him. But before he died, he gave me something. His grandfather's journal, the one he'd kept during his logging days in the Adirondacks. Most of it was mundane stuff, weather reports, work schedules, pay records. But scattered throughout were entries that made my blood run cold. June 15th, 1923. Lost another crew yesterday. 5 men working the North Ridge. Found their camp this morning, but no sign of them. Food still warm on the fire, coffee still hot, like they just vanished into thin air. July 2nd, 1923. Something's been following us. Can hear it moving through the trees at night, always just out of sight. The men are getting spooked. Half of them want to quit and head back to town. July 10th, 1923. Found bones by the lake. Old ones picked clean, but arranged in patterns like some kind of message. The old-timers say it's the hunger, marking its territory. Say we should leave before it notices us. July 18th, 1923. It noticed us. God help us, it noticed us. The entries stopped there. According to family records, my great-grandfather had indeed quit the logging company that summer and moved his family south, away from the mountains. He'd never spoken of why. Now, I knew. The worst part was the final page of the journal, written in a different hand. Shaky letters that spelled out a warning. They wear the faces of the lost. They speak with the voices of the dead. They are always hungry, and they never forget. Stay away from the deep woods. Stay away from the quiet lakes. Some hungers can never be satisfied. It was signed F.J. 1967, my father's initials, and the year he would have turned 21. The year he'd made his last trip to Lake Solitude with his own father. I should have burned the journal. Should have tried to forget everything I'd learned about that terrible place and the things that lived there. But I didn't. Instead, I've been researching, looking into the history of the region, the patterns of disappearances, the stories that local tribes told about certain lakes and valleys. And what I've found terrifies me. Because Lake Solitude isn't the only place where people vanish without a trace. There are dozens of similar locations scattered throughout the Adirondacks, all with the same characteristics: remote, beautiful, and avoided by local wildlife. All with bone-covered lake bottoms. All with stories of the hunger. I think they're connected somehow, these places. part of a network of feeding grounds that stretches across the entire mountain range. And I think the things that live there are growing stronger, more active. The disappearances are increasing. Last month, I received an email from a hiker who'd found my name on a missing persons forum. She wanted to ask me about David, about what had really happened at Lake Solitude. Her brother had vanished near a remote lake in the northern Adirondacks. The search teams had found his campsite intact, his food still fresh, his coffee still warm. They never found his body. But 3 days after the official search ended, other hikers reported seeing someone matching his description walking the forest trails. Always at dusk, always alone, always calling out to passing strangers in a friendly voice. "Want to see something amazing?" he would say. "I found the most beautiful lake. Just follow me." Some hikers followed. They were never seen again. I told the woman to stay away from the mountains, to forget about her brother and move on with her life. But I could hear in her voice the same determination that had driven me to research the Hollow Ones. She won't listen. She'll go back, looking for answers. And eventually, she'll find them. The same way David found them. The same way dozens of others have found them over the years. Because the Hollow Ones are patient. They can wait decades between feedings, sustained by the bones and memories of previous victims. But when new prey wanders into their territory, they remember how to hunt, how to lure, how to wear the faces of the lost and speak with the voices of the dead. I've been having dreams lately, dreams where David calls to me from the forest, telling me he's found something wonderful, something I need to see. I wake up in cold sweats, but the dreams feel more real each time, more compelling. Sometimes I catch myself looking up hiking trails to the Adirondacks, plotting routes to remote lakes where a man could disappear without a trace, where I could find my brother again, where the Hollow Ones are waiting, still hungry, always hungry. I think they're calling me home, and I'm starting to wonder if I have the strength to resist much longer, because some hungers, once awakened, can never truly be satisfied. They just grow stronger, and hungrier, and more patient, until even the strongest will crumble, and you find yourself walking into the deep woods, following a familiar voice that promises reunion with everything you've lost, everything you've missed, everything you've mourned. If you'll just come a little deeper into the forest, just a little closer to the lake, where the bones lie in careful patterns on the bottom, and the Hollow Ones wait in patient, terrible silence, forever and ever, in the darkness between the trees. We should have never gone to Badlands National Park. I'm Sarah Rodriguez. I was 26 back then. And this is the story of how I lost everything. The plan had been Marcus's idea, though I'd been the one to suggest South Dakota. My boyfriend of 3 years was going through what he called his quarter-life crisis, burned out from his job as a software developer, questioning everything about his future. A road trip in an RV, he said, would give us time to figure things out, time to reconnect away from the pressures of city life. Just you, me, and the open road, he'd said with that boyish grin that had first attracted me to him. Like Kerouac, but with air conditioning and a bathroom. My younger sister Emma had begged to come along. At 19, she was between her sophomore and junior years at college, working a summer job at a coffee shop that barely paid her rent. The idea of a free vacation was too tempting to pass up, and Marcus had readily agreed. He'd always gotten along well with Emma. Sometimes I thought they connected better than he and I did. The 32-foot Winnebago we'd rented in Minneapolis was more luxurious than anything I'd ever stayed in. 3 separate sleeping areas, a full kitchen, even a washer and dryer. It felt less like camping and more like driving a small apartment across the country. Our first few days had been perfect. We'd toured the Black Hills, seen Mount Rushmore, explored the quirky tourist traps that dotted the highways. Emma had documented everything on her Instagram, taking endless selfies and videos while Marcus good-naturedly played photographer. But when we reached Badlands National Park, something changed. The landscape was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Towering spires of layered rock rising from an almost lunar expanse of grassland. The sedimentary formations had been carved by millions of years of wind and water into fantastic shapes that looked more like alien architecture than anything natural. "It's so empty," Emma had observed as we drove the loop road through the park. She was right. Despite being midsummer, we'd seen remarkably few other visitors. The landscape seemed to swallow sound, creating an oppressive silence broken only by the rumble of our diesel engine. "That's the point," Marcus replied, though his usual enthusiasm seemed forced. "We wanted to get away from crowds, right? We'd chosen Sage Creek Campground specifically because it was primitive. No hookups, no amenities beyond pit toilets, just dispersed camping in the vast prairie that bordered the dramatic rock formations. The idea had been to find true solitude, to experience the night sky without light pollution. What we found was something far more unsettling. The campground was essentially open prairie with designated camping areas marked by small posts. We could park anywhere within the marked boundaries, and other campers could be miles away. When we arrived in the late afternoon, we seemed to be the only people there. "Creepy," Emma said, stepping out of the RV to survey our surroundings. The silence was indeed unnerving. No wind rustled the grass, no birds called. Even the insects seemed absent. The only sound was a faint humming that I couldn't identify. So low it was almost felt rather than heard. "Probably just the wind through the rock formations," Marcus said when I mentioned it. But I noticed he kept looking toward the distant Badlands, their jagged silhouettes dark against the evening sky. We set up camp in a spot that offered good views of both the prairie and the approaching Badlands. Marcus connected the generator to power our lights and appliances, while Emma and I explored the immediate area around our site. That's when we found the circle. It was about 50 yards from where we'd parked the RV, barely visible in the tall prairie grass. At first glance, it looked like a natural formation, a ring where the grass grew differently, creating a circle of darker, shorter vegetation about 20 feet in diameter. But as I looked closer, I realized the grass wasn't just different, it was dead, completely brown and withered, as if something had poisoned the soil in a perfect circle. "That's weird," Emma said, kneeling at the edge of the dead zone. "What could cause something like this?" I knelt beside her and touched the brown grass. It crumbled at my touch, dissolving into ash-like fragments that the wind immediately scattered. "Chemical spill, maybe?" I suggested, though the perfect circular shape argued against any kind of accident. "Or fungus," Emma said, "some kind of plant disease." But even as we speculated, I felt an inexplicable urge to step into the circle. The feeling was so strong it was almost physical. A tugging sensation in my chest as if something invisible was pulling me toward the center of the dead zone. I actually took a step forward before Emma grabbed my arm. "Sarah, don't. Don't what? Don't go in there. Something about it feels wrong." I looked at my sister in surprise. Emma was the practical one, the science major who believed in rational explanations for everything. For her to admit something felt wrong was completely out of character. But as I looked at the circle again, I had to admit she was right. There was something deeply unsettling about the perfect ring of death in the midst of the living prairie. "Come on," I said, backing away. "Let's go tell Marcus what we found." But when we returned to the RV, Marcus was standing beside our camp with his back to us, staring out at the Badlands in the distance. He didn't respond when we called his name, didn't react when Emma waved her hand in front of his face. "Marcus." I touched his shoulder and he startled as if waking from a deep sleep. "What?" "Sorry, I was just..." He looked confused, disoriented. There was something out there, in the rocks. "What kind of something?" Emma asked. "I don't know. Movement. Like someone was watching us." I followed his gaze toward the distant formations but saw nothing but stone and shadow. "Probably just a coyote," I said, "or a park ranger checking on campers." But Marcus shook his head. It was bigger than a coyote, and it moved wrong, like it wasn't used to walking on two legs. A chill ran down my spine at his words, though I couldn't say why. "Come on," I said, forcing lightness into my voice. "Let's get some dinner started. You'll feel better once you eat something." We cooked on the RV's outdoor grill as the sun set behind the Badlands. painting the rock formations in shades of gold and crimson. The silence continued to press around us, broken only by the occasional pop of our propane flame and the distant hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Emma was unusually quiet during dinner, picking at her food and constantly glancing toward the dead circle we'd found earlier. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "That circle," she said. "I can't stop thinking about it, and I keep feeling like—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Like something wants me to go back there." Marcus looked up sharply. "You feel it too?" "Feel what?" "The pulling. Like something's calling you." My blood ran cold. I'd felt the same inexplicable urge, but hearing that all three of us were experiencing it made it somehow more real, more threatening. "It's probably just psychological," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. We're in an isolated place. Our minds are creating patterns that aren't really there. But even as I spoke, I could feel it. A subtle but persistent tugging sensation, as if an invisible rope was tied around my chest, pulling me toward the circle of dead grass. "We should leave," Emma said suddenly. "Pack up tonight and drive somewhere else." Marcus nodded. "I agree. This place feels contaminated somehow." I wanted to argue, to insist we were being irrational. We'd planned this stop, paid the camping fees, and the next available campground was hours away. But the pull I felt toward the circle was getting stronger, and the thought of spending a night here filled me with inexplicable dread. "Okay," I said, "let's pack up." But as we started breaking down our campsite, the generator sputtered and died. Marcus spent an hour trying to restart it, checking fuel levels and connections, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Without the generator, we had no way to retract the RV's slide-outs or power the hydraulic leveling system. "We're stuck," he announced grimly, "at least until morning, when I can get better light to work on it." The prairie night was darker than anything I'd ever experienced in the city. No moon was visible, and the stars, while spectacular, provided virtually no ground-level illumination. Our battery-powered lanterns created small pools of light that only made the surrounding darkness seem deeper and more menacing. We retreated into the RV, locking the door behind us. Though what we thought we were locking out, none of us could say. "I don't like this," Emma whispered, peering out the window toward where we knew the circle lay hidden in the darkness. "It's just one night," I said, trying to reassure myself as much as her. "Tomorrow we'll get the generator running and find somewhere else to camp." But as the hours passed, it became clear that this would be far from an ordinary night. The pulling sensation grew stronger after sunset. What had been a subtle urge during daylight became an almost overwhelming compulsion. I found myself moving toward the RV's door multiple times, my hand on the handle before I caught myself. Marcus was experiencing the same thing. I watched him struggle against the invisible force, his face contorting with effort as he fought the urge to leave the safety of our temporary home. Emma was affected most strongly of all. She paced the small confines of the RV like a caged animal, constantly moving toward the door before forcing herself to turn away. "I have to go out there," she said around midnight, her voice strained. "I have to see what's in the circle." "No," I said firmly, though my own resistance was weakening. "Whatever's happening, we need to stay together, stay inside." But the compulsion was growing stronger by the hour. It felt like trying to resist gravity, a fundamental force that could only be fought for so long before exhaustion set in. Around 2 in the morning, Emma stopped fighting. I was dozing fitfully on the fold-out couch when I heard the door open. By the time I was fully awake, Emma was already outside, walking across the dark prairie toward the circle. "Emma!" I shouted, scrambling to follow her. Marcus was right behind me as we stumbled through the darkness, guided only by the faint starlight and Emma's pale figure moving steadily toward the dead zone. "Emma, stop!" I called, but she didn't respond. She walked with the mechanical precision of a sleepwalker, her arms at her sides, her gaze fixed straight ahead. We caught up to her just as she reached the edge of the circle. In the darkness, the dead grass looked like a pool of black water, perfectly round and utterly still. "Emma," I said, grabbing her arm, "don't go in there." She turned to look at me, and I gasped. Her eyes were completely dilated. the pupils so large they looked like black holes in her pale face. "I have to," she said in a voice that didn't sound quite like her own. "They're waiting for me." "Who's waiting?" Marcus demanded, but Emma had already stepped into the circle. The moment her foot touched the dead grass, everything changed. The air inside the circle began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The humming sound we'd noticed earlier became audible, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. And Emma began to change. It started subtly. A slight elongation of her limbs, a stretching of her torso that was barely perceptible in the darkness. But as the seconds passed, the transformation became more pronounced. Her arms grew longer, her fingers extending into impossibly thin appendages that moved with alien grace. Her neck stretched upward, lifting her head several feet higher than should have been possible. Her skin took on a pale, luminescent quality that cast its own faint light. "Emma," I whispered, horrified. She turned toward me, and I saw that her face was no longer entirely human. Her features had been elongated, refined into something beautiful but utterly alien. Her eyes had grown larger, darker, reflecting the starlight like pools of oil. "I understand now," she said, but her voice came from multiple directions at once, as if the circle itself was speaking. "This is what I was meant to be, what we're all meant to be." She raised one impossibly long arm and pointed toward the Badlands. Following her gesture, I saw lights flickering among the rock formations. Not electric lights, but the same pale bioluminescence that now emanated from my sister's transformed body. "They've been waiting so long," Emma continued, "waiting for the right ones, the ones who can hear the call." "Emma, this isn't you," I pleaded. "Fight it. Come back to us." But she shook her transformed head with inhuman grace. "This is more me than I've ever been. Don't you feel it, Sarah? The pull? The belonging?" And to my horror, I did feel it. Standing at the edge of the circle, the compulsion to join my sister was almost irresistible. The transformation looked painful, but also beautiful, transcendent. Marcus grabbed my hand, anchoring me to reality. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently. "Now." But Emma was moving toward us, her elongated form gliding across the dead grass with hypnotic grace. "Join me," she said, extending one pale, stretched hand. "Let them show you what you can become." The lights in the Badlands were getting brighter, and I could see shapes moving among the rock formations. Tall, impossibly thin figures that moved with the same alien grace as my transformed sister. "They're coming," Emma said with obvious joy. "The Watchers are coming to welcome you." That broke the spell. The word "Watchers" sent a spike of pure terror through me, and I stumbled backward, pulling Marcus with me. "Run!" I gasped. We fled across the dark prairie, guided only by the distant glow of our RV's emergency lights. Behind us, Emma's voice called out, no longer entirely human, pleading with us to return, to accept the gift the Watchers wanted to give us. We reached the RV and threw ourselves inside, locking the door behind us. Through the windows, we could see the pale glow of the circle and Emma's transformed figure standing at its center. The lights in the Badlands were definitely moving now, getting closer. "We have to leave," Marcus said, his hands shaking as he tried to start the engine. "Generator or no generator, we have to get out of here." The diesel engine turned over, and Marcus began the complicated process of retracting the slide-outs manually. It would take time we didn't have, but staying was not an option. As he worked, I watched through the rear window as the lights from the Badlands reached the circle. The Watchers, I could see them clearly now, were impossibly tall and thin, their pale bodies moving with fluid grace across the prairie grass. They gathered around Emma's transformed figure, embracing her with elongated arms that seemed to bend in too many places. "Sarah," Emma's voice called, though I could no longer see her among the crowd of alien figures. "Don't leave me here. This is where we belong. This is what we're meant to become." But I could hear the lie in her words now. Whatever had taken my sister's place wasn't Emma anymore. It was something else, something that wore her voice but had forgotten how to be human. The slide-outs finally retracted with a mechanical whine, and Marcus threw the RV into drive. We lurched forward across the uneven ground, our headlights cutting through the darkness as we navigated toward the campground exit. In the rearview mirror, I could see the watchers following us, not running, but gliding across the ground with impossible speed. Their pale forms seemed to blur at the edges, as if they weren't entirely solid. But as we reached the paved road and picked up speed, they fell behind. Whatever power they had seemed confined to the immediate area around the circle. Once we crossed some invisible boundary, they stopped pursuing us entirely. We drove through the night without stopping, neither of us speaking until we reached a truck stop in Rapid City as the sun was rising. Only then did we allow ourselves to believe we'd escaped. "We have to report this," I said as we sat in the truck stop parking lot, drinking bad coffee and trying to process what had happened. "Emma is missing. We need to call the police." Marcus looked at me with hollow eyes. "And tell them what? That our sister was transformed into an alien being by a circle of dead grass? We'll say she wandered off in the night, got lost. They'll search. They'll find the circle, the lights, those things." I thought about that for a moment. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe someone needs to know what's out there. But Marcus shook his head. "They won't find anything. I guarantee you that circle is gone, along with any evidence of what happened. These watchers, or whatever they are, they've been doing this for a long time. They know how to cover their tracks." He was right, of course. When the search and rescue teams scoured the area over the following week, they found no trace of Emma. No circle of dead grass, no unusual formations. Nothing to suggest anything out of the ordinary had occurred. The official report concluded that Emma Rodriguez had wandered away from the campsite during the night and become lost in the vast expanse of Badlands National Park. Despite extensive searching, no trace of her was ever found. Marcus and I never spoke about what really happened. The shared trauma drove us apart rather than bringing us together. We broke up 6 months later, unable to look at each other without remembering that terrible night. I moved to a different city, changed jobs, tried to rebuild my life. But some experiences leave marks that never fade, because I know Emma is still out there. Not my sister, the thing that took her place, but something wearing her form, her voice, her memories. And sometimes, late at night, I can feel it calling to me. The pull is subtle but persistent, a gentle tugging sensation that grows stronger when I'm alone, when I'm vulnerable. It speaks with Emma's voice, tells me about the wonderful transformation waiting for me, the community of watchers who understand what it means to transcend human limitations. And the terrible truth is, part of me wants to answer. Part of me remembers how beautiful Emma looked in those final moments, how graceful and otherworldly, how peaceful she seemed as she embraced her new nature. Sometimes I catch myself researching the Badlands online, looking at satellite images of Sage Creek Campground, trying to spot anything unusual in the vast expanse of prairie grass. Sometimes I plan road trips that would take me back to South Dakota, back to that circle of dead grass and the patient beings who wait there. I tell myself it's morbid curiosity, an obsession with understanding what happened to my sister. But deep down, I know the truth. The Watchers didn't just take Emma that night. They planted something in me, too. A seed of longing, a desire to belong to something greater than human existence. And that seed is growing. Last month, I received a message on Facebook from someone I didn't recognize. A woman named Jennifer, who said she'd found my name in connection with missing person reports from the Badlands. Her boyfriend had vanished during a camping trip to Sage Creek Campground. He'd gone for a walk after dinner and never returned. The search teams found no trace of him, just like with Emma. But 3 days after the official search ended, other campers reported seeing a tall, pale figure walking the prairie at night. When they called out to it, it responded in her boyfriend's voice, inviting them to come closer, to see something wonderful he'd discovered. "I know this sounds crazy," Jennifer wrote, "but I think he's still out there, changed, but still alive somehow. I'm planning to go back, to try to find him. Would you be willing to meet with me, to tell me what you know about that place?" I stared at her message for a long time before typing my response. "Don't go back there," I wrote. "Whatever you think you'll find, whatever you hope to accomplish, it's not worth it. Your boyfriend is gone. Let him go." But I knew she wouldn't listen. I could see it in the desperate hope in her words, the same obsessive need that had been growing in me for 3 years. She would go back to the Badlands. She would find the circle, or one like it. And the Watchers would welcome her the same way they'd welcomed Emma, the same way they're waiting to welcome me. Because I know now that what happened to us wasn't random. The Watchers don't just take anyone who stumbles across their territory. They're selective, choosing people who have the capacity for transformation, who can hear their call across the vast distances of space and time. People like Emma, people like Jennifer, people like me. The pull is getting stronger every day. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night standing by my window, looking west toward South Dakota. Sometimes I find myself on travel websites, booking flights to Rapid City before catching myself and closing the browser. And sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I can hear Emma's voice calling to me from across 1,000 miles of prairie grass. "Come home, Sarah," she says. "Come home and see what you can become." I've been resisting for 3 years now, but my strength is failing. The human world feels increasingly gray and meaningless, while the memory of that pale light in the circle grows brighter and more alluring with each passing day. I think I understand now why the Watchers don't pursue those who flee. They don't need to. The seed they plant grows on its own, fed by loneliness and isolation, and the very human desire to belong to something greater than ourselves. They know that eventually we'll come back on our own. We'll return to the circle of dead grass and the patient figures who wait there, ready to show us what we can become if we're willing to let go of our humanity, ready to transform us into something beautiful and alien and eternal, ready to welcome us home. I bought a plane ticket to Rapid City yesterday. The flight leaves tomorrow morning. I told myself I'm just going to visit Emma's memorial marker to have some closure. But I know that's a lie. I'm going back to the circle. I'm going back to the Watchers. And this time, I'm not going to run. Because Emma was right about one thing. This is what I'm meant to be. What I've always been meant to be. The transformation is just the beginning. The real journey starts when you stop fighting the call and embrace what's waiting for you in the endless prairie darkness. What's waiting for all of us, if we're brave enough to answer, if we're ready to stop being human and start being something more. The Watchers are patient. They've been waiting for millions of years, and they can wait a little longer, but not much longer, because some calls can't be resisted forever, and some seeds once planted will always grow toward the light, even if that light comes from alien stars and promises a transformation beyond human understanding, even if it means leaving everything human behind. Forever. I never believed in the stories they told about the Ozark Mountains, until what happened to me out there. My name is Daniel Lopez. I'm 28 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. The company retreat had been my idea, a mistake I'll regret for the rest of my life. As the newest manager at Hartwell & Associates, I'd suggested we take the whole accounting team on a team-building camping trip. 20 people from the office, including my boss Patricia Chen and her assistant Julie, along with most of the junior staff I supervised. It'll be great for morale. I'd pitched to Patricia during our quarterly review. Get everyone out of the office, away from spreadsheets and deadlines. Build some real connections. Patricia had been skeptical. A no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd built her career on efficiency and results, she wasn't exactly the outdoorsy type. But the company had been struggling with turnover lately, and she'd agreed to give it a try. "One weekend," she'd said. "And if this turns into some kind of disaster, Lopez, it's coming out of your performance review." The plan was simple enough. We'd rent 3 large RVs to accommodate everyone, drive down to Arkansas, and spend a long weekend at Buffalo National River. Canoeing, hiking, campfire stories, the works. I'd researched the area extensively, picked out a remote campground that could handle our group, made all the reservations. What I hadn't researched was the history of Bone Hollow. The drive from Kansas City to Arkansas took most of Friday. our little convoy of rental RVs winding through increasingly mountainous terrain as we headed south. I was driving the lead vehicle, a massive 40-foot Class A that could sleep 8 people, while Patricia navigated from the passenger seat and our colleagues followed in 2 smaller units behind us. The mood was festive at first. Julie had organized road trip games over the CB radio, and even Patricia seemed to be loosening up as the miles passed. But as we entered the Ozark Mountains, the atmosphere began to change. The mountains were older than anything I'd expected. Not the sharp peaks of the Rockies, but ancient weathered hills covered in dense forests that seemed to swallow sound. The roads narrowed and twisted, and our cell phone signals disappeared entirely. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" Patricia asked as we passed yet another unmarked dirt road branching off into the woods. I checked the GPS, but the screen showed only a vague approximation of our location. "The campground should be just ahead," I said, though I was beginning to have doubts myself. We'd been driving for 3 hours through increasingly remote country, following a series of Forest Service roads that seemed to lead nowhere. The few signs we'd seen were weathered and illegible, and we hadn't passed another vehicle in over an hour. "There," Julie called over the radio from the second RV. "I see a sign up ahead." The wooden marker was nearly hidden by overgrown brush, but I could just make out the faded letters, Bone Hollow Campground, 2 miles. Below that, in smaller text that I couldn't quite read from the driver's seat, was what looked like additional information. "Bone Hollow," Patricia said, consulting her folder of paperwork. "That's not the name I have written down." I frowned, checking my own notes. According to my research, we were supposed to be going to Cedar Creek Campground, but the GPS had been unreliable all day, and it was possible I'd gotten confused about the exact location. "We'll check it out," I said into the CB microphone. "If it's not right, we'll backtrack." The dirt road to Bone Hollow wound through dense forest for exactly 2 miles before opening into a large clearing beside a slow-moving creek. The campground was bigger than I'd expected, easily large enough for our 3 RVs plus a dozen more, but it appeared to be completely empty. "Weird," said Tom Rivera, one of our senior accountants, as he climbed out of the second RV. "Where is everybody? It's peak season." He was right. It was late June, perfect camping weather, and we were in one of Arkansas's most popular recreation areas. The campground should have been packed with families and outdoor enthusiasts. Instead, it was eerily quiet. "Maybe we got lucky," said Kelly Park, a junior associate who'd been with the company for 6 months. "Privacy for our team-building activities." But as I walked around the campground, I began to notice things that didn't seem right. The fire rings were old and weathered, with no recent signs of use. The picnic tables were covered in a thick layer of dust and fallen leaves. The pit toilets, while functional, had the musty smell of long disuse. Most disturbing of all were the signs. They were posted on trees around the perimeter of the campground. Official-looking Forest Service notices that I couldn't quite read in the fading afternoon light. When I walked closer to examine one, the text made my stomach clench with unease. "Warning: this area has been associated with multiple missing person incidents. Campers are advised to remain in designated areas after dark. Do not investigate unusual sounds or lights. Report any suspicious activity to park rangers immediately." Below that, in smaller print, "Last updated, September 1995. The sign was nearly 30 years old, which might explain why the campground seemed abandoned. But if there had been safety issues, why wasn't the area officially closed? "Daniel," Patricia called from the largest RV. "We need to talk." I found her standing in the doorway with a concerned expression, holding a folded piece of paper. "I found this taped to the door," she said, handing me what looked like a hastily written note. The message was brief and unsigned. "Don't stay here after dark. The Hollow takes what it wants. Go back while you can." "Someone's idea of a prank," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Patricia wasn't convinced. "Daniel, I think we should leave. Find a different campground." I wanted to agree, but the nearest alternative was hours away, and it was already past 5 o'clock. Getting 3 large RVs back through those winding mountain roads in the dark would be dangerous. Possibly impossible. "Let's give it one night," I said. "If anyone feels uncomfortable, we'll leave first thing in the morning." It was a decision I'd regret for the rest of my life. We spent the early evening setting up camp and trying to maintain the upbeat atmosphere of a company retreat. I organized a walking tour of the immediate area, pointing out the creek and the hiking trails that disappeared into the surrounding forest. Kelly and Julie collected firewood while Tom and Patricia worked on dinner preparations. But as the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the campground, the mood shifted noticeably. Conversations became quieter, more subdued. People began glancing nervously toward the dark forest that pressed close around our small clearing. "This place gives me the creeps," whispered Maria Santos, our payroll coordinator, as we gathered around the fire ring after dinner. She wasn't alone in that sentiment. Even during our meal, I'd noticed people unconsciously moving closer together, as if seeking safety in numbers. The forest around us was unnaturally quiet. No bird calls, no insect sounds, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. "It's just the isolation," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "City folks aren't used to this much wilderness." But privately, I was becoming increasingly uneasy. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of the creek and the occasional pop from our campfire. It felt as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. "Anyone know why this place is called Bone Hollow?" asked Rick Chen, Patricia's nephew who worked in our IT department. "Probably just a name," Tom said. "These old mountain areas have lots of colorful names. Bear Creek, Dead Horse Canyon, that sort of thing." But Kelly had pulled out her phone and was frowning at the screen. "I can't get any signal, but I downloaded some stuff about the area before we left the city. Give me a second." She scrolled through her saved files, then looked up with a pale expression. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, this is not good." "What?" several people asked at once. Kelly cleared her throat and began reading from her phone. Bone Hollow gets its name from an incident in 1923 when a logging crew discovered a large cache of human remains in a cave system near the current campground. The bones showed signs of... She paused, looking uncomfortable. Signs of having been deliberately arranged in ritual patterns. The fire seemed to dim as she spoke, though I knew that was just my imagination. "The cave was sealed," Kelly continued, "but there were additional incidents over the years. Campers who disappeared without a trace. Search parties that found evidence of unusual activity in the forest." "What kind of unusual activity?" Patricia asked, though she looked like she'd rather not know. Kelly was quiet for a moment, then said, "The last official report was filed in 1995. A family of 4 vanished from this campground. Their RV was found intact, with food still warm on the table and personal belongings untouched. But the family was never located." A chill ran through the group. I could see the fear in their faces, illuminated by the flickering firelight. "That's enough ghost stories," I said firmly. "Kelly, put the phone away. We're here to build team morale, not scare each other with local legends." But the damage was done. The relaxed atmosphere of our company retreat had evaporated, replaced by a tension that was almost palpable. People began excusing themselves early, retreating to the safety of the RVs as full darkness settled over the hollow. By 10 o'clock, only Patricia, Tom, and I remained by the dying fire. "We should have left when I suggested it," Patricia said quietly. "I can feel it, Daniel. Something's wrong with this place." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't deny my own growing unease. The silence of the forest was unnatural, oppressive. Even the creek seemed to have stopped flowing, though I knew that was impossible. "First thing in the morning," I promised. "We'll pack up and find somewhere else." But we never made it to morning. I was lying in my bunk in the master RV around midnight when I heard the first sound that didn't belong. A low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from deep underground. At first I thought it might be the RV's generator, but the sound was too organic, too musical. I sat up, listening intently. The humming continued for several minutes, then gradually faded into silence. I was just beginning to think I'd imagined it when I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling the RV. but these weren't the normal sounds of someone walking on grass and dirt. These footsteps had a hollow quality, like someone walking on wooden planks or bones. I moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. The campfire had died to glowing embers, providing virtually no illumination. But as my eyes adjusted, I could make out shapes moving between the RVs. Tall, impossibly thin figures that seemed to glide rather than walk. They moved with purpose, examining our vehicles, testing doors and windows with long, spindly appendages that looked more like branches than arms. I counted at least a dozen of them, though more seemed to emerge from the forest with each passing minute. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but of course there was no signal. We were completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in a hollow that seemed to exist outside normal space and time. The creatures, for lack of a better word, began to move closer to the RVs. Through the thin walls, I could hear muffled sounds from the other vehicles. Quiet whimpering, hushed conversations. The sound of people trying to stay silent while gripped by terror. Then one of the creatures approached my window. In the faint starlight, I could see its face, or what passed for a face. The features were roughly human but wrong in every detail. The eyes were too large and entirely black. The mouth was too wide, stretching nearly from ear to ear, and the skin had a pale, translucent quality that seemed to glow with its own faint light. It pressed its face against the glass, studying me with those terrible black eyes. Its mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Then it raised one impossibly long arm and began tapping against the window with finger-like appendages that ended in sharp points. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was hypnotic, almost musical. I found myself leaning closer to the glass, drawn by some inexplicable compulsion to open the window, to let the creature inside. "Daniel!" Patricia's voice snapped me out of my trance. I turned to see her standing in the narrow hallway of the RV, her face pale with terror. "There are more of them," she whispered. "They're all around us." I looked back at the window, but the creature was gone. In fact, all the shapes I'd seen moving between the RVs had disappeared, as if they'd simply melted back into the darkness. "Where did they go?" I asked. Before Patricia could answer, we heard a sound that made both of us freeze with horror. Screaming. It was coming from one of the other RVs. High-pitched, terrified screams that cut through the night air like knives. The sound went on for nearly 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly, leaving only the oppressive silence of the hollow. "Someone's in trouble," I said, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen counter. "Don't go out there," Patricia pleaded. "It's what they want." But I couldn't just hide while our colleagues were in danger. Against every instinct of self-preservation, I unlocked the RV door and stepped out into the night. The air outside was thick and humid, with an underlying odor of decay that I hadn't noticed earlier. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing an empty campground that looked subtly different from how we'd left it. The other two RVs were exactly where we'd parked them, but their windows were dark. No lights, no signs of movement, no indication that anyone was inside. "Hello?" I called softly. "Is everyone okay?" No response. I approached the nearest RV, the one where Kelly, Maria, and 3 other colleagues had been sleeping. The door was slightly ajar, which was odd since everyone had been paranoid about locking up before bed. I pushed the door open and shined my flashlight inside. The RV was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. No luggage, no personal belongings, no sleeping bags or pillows. It looked as though it had been thoroughly cleaned and stripped of any evidence that anyone had ever been there. But that was impossible. I'd seen people enter this RV just hours earlier. I'd watched them close and lock the door. I moved to the second RV with growing dread, already knowing what I would find. This vehicle was equally empty, equally pristine. Tom, Rick, and the others who'd been sleeping there had vanished without a trace. "Daniel!" Patricia's voice called from behind me, sharp with panic. I turned to see her standing beside our RV, pointing toward the forest. "Look," she whispered. At the edge of the tree line, barely visible in the darkness, stood a line of pale figures. The creatures I'd seen earlier, but now I could see them more clearly. They were arranging something on the ground, long, white objects that caught the faint starlight. Bones. They were laying out human bones in complex patterns, working with the focused attention of artists creating a masterpiece. Skulls formed geometric shapes. Femurs and rib cages created intricate spirals. Smaller bones filled in the gaps, creating an elaborate mandala of death that stretched across the forest floor. And at the center of the pattern, barely visible in the darkness, were figures that looked disturbingly familiar. The missing members of our team, standing motionless among the bone arrangements like living statues. "We have to get out of here," I said, grabbing Patricia's arm. "Right now." But as we turned back toward our RV, we found the way blocked. More of the pale creatures had emerged from the forest, surrounding us in a loose circle. They moved with that same gliding motion I'd observed earlier, their black eyes fixed on us with unmistakable hunger. "Back to back," I whispered to Patricia. "Don't let them separate us." The creatures began to close in, moving with deliberate slowness. They seemed to be savoring our fear, drawing out the moment before they struck. One of them stepped forward, taller than the others with features that were slightly more defined. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through dead leaves. "Welcome to Bone Hollow," it said. "We've been waiting for you." "What do you want?" I managed to ask. The creature tilted its head, studying us with those terrible black eyes. "What we've always wanted, what we need to continue. Fresh bones for the pattern, fresh life to sustain us. The people from our group, where are they? They've joined the arrangement, become part of something greater than they could ever have been alone." The creature gestured toward the forest, where I could still see our colleagues standing motionless among the bone patterns. They understand now. The beauty of the design, the perfection of the eternal dance. I looked more closely at the figures in the forest and realized with horror that they weren't quite human anymore. Their proportions were wrong, elongated and twisted. Their skin had the same pale, translucent quality as the creatures surrounding us. "You're changing them," I said. "We're perfecting them, removing the chaotic element of individual will, making them part of the greater pattern that has existed here for centuries." The circle of creatures was getting tighter. I could feel their cold breath on my skin, smell the odor of ancient death that emanated from their pale forms. "The Hollow has always been hungry," the lead creature continued, "fed by travelers who wandered too far from the safe paths. But in recent decades, the offerings have been irregular. We've grown weak, dispersed. Tonight, we feast. Tonight, we restore the pattern to its former glory." Patricia pressed closer against me, trembling with terror. I could feel her rapid heartbeat through her thin shirt. "Run," I whispered. "When I give the signal, run for the trees." "They'll catch us," she whispered back. "Maybe, but staying here is certain death." The creatures were almost close enough to touch us now. Their long, branch-like arms were extending toward us, fingers ending in sharp points that looked designed for tearing flesh from bone. "Now!" I shouted. We broke in opposite directions, hoping to confuse our pursuers. I heard Patricia crash through the underbrush to my left as I sprinted toward the creek, hoping the water might provide some barrier against the creatures. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of pursuit. Not footsteps, but a whisper of movement through the air, as if the creatures were flying rather than running. I reached the creek bank and dove into the water without hesitation. The current was stronger than I'd expected, immediately sweeping me downstream away from the campground. The water was shockingly cold, numbing my limbs and making it difficult to swim. But the cold was better than the alternative. I let the current carry me for several hundred yards before struggling to shore on the opposite bank. My flashlight was gone, lost in the water, leaving me in complete darkness. But I could hear sounds behind me, splashing in the creek, the whisper of movement through the trees. They were following. I stumbled through the forest, guided only by instinct and the desperate need to put distance between myself and the hollow. Branches tore at my clothes and face. Roots caught my feet, sending me sprawling repeatedly. But I kept moving, driven by pure terror. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed meaningless in the darkness. Eventually, I found myself on what felt like a dirt road. I followed it uphill, away from the creek, praying it would lead me back to civilization. Dawn was breaking when I finally saw electric lights ahead, a small gas station and convenience store at a rural crossroads. I stumbled through the door, dripping wet and covered in scratches, probably looking like a madman. The elderly clerk behind the counter took one look at me and reached for the phone. "Don't call the police," I said quickly. "Not yet. I need to know." "Bone Hollow. Do you know about Bone Hollow?" The man's face went pale. "You were at Bone Hollow?" I nodded. "Jesus," he whispered. "How many of you went in?" 20, but I think I'm the only one who got out." The clerk was already dialing. "This is Earl at the crossroads," he said into the phone. "We got another survivor from the Hollow. Send the federal boys." Federal boys. Over the next several hours, I learned that Bone Hollow was well known to certain government agencies. The area had been under unofficial monitoring for decades, ever since the incident in 1923. The Forest Service maintained the fiction that it was simply another campground, but access was restricted through bureaucratic means. Permits that were never approved, reservations that were mysteriously canceled. Most people who tried to camp there were turned away by one excuse or another. But occasionally, a group would slip through the cracks. Like us. The search teams found our 3 RVs exactly where we'd left them, completely empty and cleaned of any personal belongings. No trace of my 19 colleagues was ever discovered, despite extensive searching. The official report blamed a hiking accident, suggesting the group had become lost in the vast wilderness of the Ozark Mountains. I was debriefed by federal agents who made it clear that my story would never be officially believed or recorded. The existence of the creatures in Bone Hollow was classified information, known only to a small group of government researchers who had been studying the phenomenon for decades. "What are they?" I asked one of the agents, a serious woman who introduced herself only as Agent Martinez. "We're not entirely sure," she admitted. "Some kind of energy beings that feed on life force. They've been in that hollow for centuries, maybe longer. The bone arrangements seem to be part of their reproductive cycle, a way of storing and concentrating the life energy they harvest. And you just let them stay there? Let people get killed?" Agent Martinez looked tired, aged by too many similar conversations. "We can't destroy them. We've tried. They're too deeply connected to the geology of the area, the limestone caves, the underground river systems. The best we can do is limit access and hope people stay away." "What about Patricia? Did she—" The agent shook her head. "No other survivors. I'm sorry. I moved to a different city after that. Changed my name. Tried to start over. But some experiences leave scars that never heal. Because I know Patricia and the others are still out there, somewhere in the bone patterns of the hollow. Not dead, but not alive either. Transformed into something that serves the hunger of ancient beings who view human life as nothing more than raw material for their eternal designs. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through the trees outside my apartment, I can hear them calling to me. Patricia's voice, faint but unmistakable, telling me how peaceful it is in the hollow, how the pain of transformation only lasts for a moment. And then there's nothing but the beauty of the pattern, the perfection of belonging to something greater than individual existence. She sounds happy. They all sound happy. And that's the most terrifying part of all, because part of me envies them. Part of me wants to return to that hollow in the Arkansas mountains, to surrender to the pale creatures and their ancient hunger, to become part of the pattern that has been growing for centuries. The rational part of my mind knows this is just trauma, survivor's guilt manifesting as a death wish. But late at night, when the darkness presses close and the silence grows too heavy to bear, I find myself researching directions to Bone Hollow, planning a trip I know I'll never return from. Because some patterns, once begun, must eventually be completed. And some hungers can only be satisfied by willing sacrifice. The pale ones are patient. They've waited for decades between feedings, sustained by the life energy stored in their bone arrangements. They can wait a little longer, but not forever, because I can feel them calling across the hundreds of miles that separate us. calling me home to the hollow where my colleagues wait in their new forms, where the pattern grows ever more complex and beautiful, where transformation promises an end to loneliness, an end to guilt, an end to the terrible burden of being the only survivor. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with my car keys in my hand, though I don't remember getting out of bed. Sometimes I find maps of Arkansas spread across my kitchen table, with a red circle drawn around a remote area in the Ozark Mountains. The pull is getting stronger, and I'm getting weaker. Soon, I think, I'll stop fighting it entirely. I'll pack a small bag, get in my car, and drive south through the night. I'll follow those winding mountain roads until I reach the unmarked dirt track that leads to Bone Hollow, where the pale ones wait among their patterns of bone and memory, where my colleagues stand in their transformed glory, ready to welcome me home, where I'll finally understand the beauty of surrender, the peace of becoming part of something eternal and perfect and utterly inhuman. The pattern must be completed, and I'm the final piece. All I have to do is stop running and embrace what I've always been meant to become, a pale figure in the Arkansas darkness, tending the bone arrangements with infinite patience, forever and ever, in the hollow where hunger never dies and the pattern grows ever more complex with each new addition, where 20 colleagues became 19 transformed beings and one terrified survivor, soon to be 20 perfect components in an ancient design, complete at last.